When we talk about the fallen angels, most people immediately think of Lucifer, the great rebel, the bright morning star who led a host of angels in defiance against God. Others may recall names like Azazel, who according to ancient writings taught mankind forbidden arts, or Samyaza, the leader of the Watchers, described in the book of Enoch. But hidden within the folds of apocryphal stories and esoteric traditions lies a darker, less spoken name, Namtael. Namtael is not a figure you will find in the canon of Scripture. He does not appear in the Bible that rests on the shelves of churches and homes. Instead, his name surfaces in fragments of apocalyptic writings, mystical traditions, and whispered legends that traveled from one generation to another. These accounts describe him not as a mere rebel angel, but as one who came closer than any other to tearing apart the very order of heaven itself. The name itself carries weight. In some traditions, Namtael has been interpreted to mean the shadow of death, or the angel of final silence. It paints a picture of an entity who was not only rebellious, but personified destruction, aiming not simply to challenge God's throne, but to erase the very harmony of creation. Unlike Lucifer, whose fall was rooted in pride, Namtael is often depicted as motivated by annihilation, desiring to unravel existence itself. So why is Namtael barely mentioned compared to other fallen beings? Part of the mystery lies in how dangerous he was considered. Certain apocryphal texts, now lost to time but referenced by early theologians, describe Namtael as the silent destroyer, the angel who walked among the stars before the rebellion, silently observing, planning, and waiting. His rebellion was not impulsive, it was calculated. Some even describe him as the strategist behind the great celestial war, whispering ideas to Lucifer and the other rebels. If this is true, it means that while Lucifer became the face of the rebellion, Namtael was the mind, moving in the shadows. This depiction of Namtael as a mastermind makes him terrifying. Scripture shows us that deception and subtlety are among the greatest weapons of darkness. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent did not use brute force to overthrow mankind, but twisted words, crafted lies, and planted doubt. In the same way, Namtael's legacy in these writings is one of hidden influence, using intelligence and cunning rather than mere prideful boasting. But perhaps the most disturbing element in these legends is the claim that Namtael almost succeeded. Where Lucifer's rebellion was crushed decisively, Namtael is said to have found ways to destabilize heaven's order. Certain visions describe him harnessing forces from beyond creation energies that were never meant to exist within the harmony of God's design. This raises difficult questions. How close can creation itself come to collapse? And if one angel could nearly unravel the heavens, what does that mean for humanity, fragile as we are? The few texts that describe Namtael often portray him as shrouded in silence, clothed in shadows darker than night. His appearance, unlike the radiant splendor of angels, was unsettling. Some sources describe him with wings burned and fractured, eyes that reflected not light, but endless void, and a countenance that inspired both fear and sorrow. He was not beautiful like Lucifer, not majestic like Michael, but dreadful, terrifying in his emptiness, and yet compelling in the way destruction often fascinates the human mind. It is no wonder then that his story was suppressed. To openly teach about an angel who nearly unmade heaven would give too much power to his memory. Instead, his name was left to fade, and his story survived only in fragments, mentioned by mystics hinted at in visions, whispered by those who studied forbidden scrolls. Yet the mystery of Namtael continues to haunt. Could it be that his existence is a reminder to humanity of the fragility of order? That even within heaven, rebellion brewed not just through pride, but through the cold and calculated desire for destruction? For if Namtael's story is true, then heaven itself was once on the brink of collapse, saved only by the intervention of God and his faithful angels. As we begin to explore his story in this series, we are not merely recounting the tale of a forgotten angel. We are uncovering a warning, a reminder that evil does not always shout with arrogance. It sometimes whispers in silence, waits patiently in the shadows, and strikes when least expected. And so, who was Namtael? Was he real? Was he a symbol? Or was he a forgotten enemy erased from history to keep us from peering too deeply into the abyss? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. His story forces us to face the possibility that destruction itself once wore the face of an angel. When the first shadows of rebellion spread across the heavenly realms, Namtael's name became a whisper of dread among the faithful hosts. He was not the loudest voice, nor the most obviously defiant like others who openly declared their hatred. Instead, his strength lay in subtlety, in persuasion, in his ability to weave doubt into the pure hearts of the angels who had never known deceit. Unlike Lucifer, who lifted himself in open pride, Namtael moved quietly, carefully, like a serpent in the garden, placing questions into minds that had only ever known obedience. Namtael's argument was dangerously simple. If God is eternal, he would ask, then why must we exist only as reflections of his will? Do we not possess within us a spark of the same eternity? And if so, why should that spark not burn brighter? Why should it not stand equal to the one who gave it? Such words were poison in the flawless halls of heaven. Yet to those untested by temptation, it felt like a new revelation. He gathered his followers in hidden assemblies, not in the open courts, but in the edges of the radiant fields and behind the shimmering rivers of heaven. There he spoke with fiery passion, his voice trembling not with rage, but with conviction. He painted visions of freedom, of a realm where angels would rule alongside God, not beneath him. His charisma was unlike any other. Even angels who swore loyalty to the throne admitted in hushed tones that Namtael's words carried weight. As the days of rebellion approached, the balance of heaven began to shift. It was not only the number of angels that worried the archangels, but the quality of those who were being swayed. Namtael was not gathering the reckless or the weak. He was drawing to himself the intelligent, the thoughtful, the ones who longed to understand mysteries that were never theirs to command. The archangels began to notice. Michael himself, the great warrior, confronted Namtael in the radiant courts one day. The tension was heavy, though no battle had yet begun. Michael asked only one question. "Do you still serve the throne of the Almighty?" Namtael, with calm eyes and a voice steady as stone, replied, "I serve the truth wherever it leads." Those words sent ripples through the gathered hosts. To some, it sounded like defiance. To others, it sounded like courage. But the danger was greater than defiance. Namtael's gift was strategy. While Lucifer dreamed of glory and placed himself at the center, Namtael thought like a general. He studied the order of the angelic ranks, the ways the heavenly armies moved, the gates and halls that led to the throne. If Lucifer was the spark, Namtael was the fire that threatened to consume all. Whispers reached the throne of God himself. The Almighty knew every secret, every plan before it was spoken. And yet, in his patience, he allowed the rebellion to take form. For free will was the test even heaven could not escape. Namtael took this patience as an opportunity. He pressed harder, tightening his circle of loyalists, preparing them for something greater than mere dissent. He prepared them for war. It was Namtael who devised the first attempt to breach the Golden Gates. Legends say he discovered a hidden weakness in the structure of heaven's fortresses, not a flaw in God's creation, but a pattern that could be exploited by those who studied it long enough. With precision, he mapped out the corridors, the angelic guard rotations, and even the moments of worship when the heavenly hosts bent in unison before the throne. He believed these pauses could be used as windows of opportunity. He spoke to his followers with promises of victory. The Almighty is eternal, yes, he declared, but eternity can be shaken if unity falters, and unity falters now. Look at the doubt within you and see it as a weapon. Together, we will rise higher than even the brightest star. His followers roared in agreement, their wings quivering with anticipation. But heaven is not shaken by shadows alone. The faithful grew more watchful. Michael and the other archangels reinforced the gates, strengthened the watch, and began calling out the deceivers. The heavens trembled with the coming storm. Namtael's first strike was not physical, but psychological. He ordered his angels to spread themselves among the faithful hosts, whispering contradictions, sparking questions. Doubts spread like fire on dry grass. For the first time, the perfect harmony of heaven sounded slightly off-key. Songs of worship felt strained, and eyes that once gazed only upward now flickered with uncertainty. Still, the throne endured. God was not moved nor surprised. He allowed the rebellion to ripen to its fullness, knowing that only through exposure could its corruption be purged. Yet for the angels who stood in the midst of this crisis, it was terrifying. The very foundations of heaven seemed fragile, and Namtael appeared closer than any rebel had ever been to unraveling eternity itself. And so, the stage was set. The heavens, once untouchable and serene, now carried the scent of coming battle. Namtael, with his voice like thunder and his mind like a sharpened blade, stood ready to lead his host into the most dangerous confrontation the universe had ever known. The heavenly host stood divided, though still concealed beneath the surface of glory. To the casual eye, the courts of heaven still shimmered with perfect beauty. Golden rivers flowed, choirs sang, radiant towers stretched into eternity. But underneath that flawless order, a fracture had spread. Namtael's words had taken root in hearts, and those seeds of doubt grew silently. Namtael's genius was not in raw power, nor in thunderous defiance. His strength lay in subtlety, in patience, in the ability to persuade without appearing to rebel. While others followed Lucifer with fiery pride and open arrogance, Namtael worked with silence and shadows. His rebellion did not scream, it whispered. He spoke of freedom, of understanding, of a hidden destiny that even God had supposedly kept from his creation. Many who heard him believed they were seeking wisdom, not treachery. He studied the patterns of angelic duty, how the guards rotated near the throne, how choirs moved in cycles of worship, how the balance of heaven relied on harmony. He was a tactician of the unseen. Where Lucifer declared, I will ascend? Namtael asked. Why have we never questioned what we serve? One sounded like pride, the other like thought. But both led to the same abyss. Among his followers were angels of great beauty and influence, those who held sway over choirs, those entrusted with tending the fires near the heavenly altars, those who walked in the gardens where knowledge flowed like streams of light. They whispered in their circles, spreading his influence further until the line between loyalty and deception blurred. The songs of worship, once flawless, began to carry faint hesitation. Voices wavered, notes faltered, and Michael, who commanded the armies of God, noticed. Michael confronted Namtael more than once. "You are stirring what must not be stirred," he said, his eyes blazing like flame. "The throne is not yours to question. Harmony is not yours to fracture." But Namtael's reply was calm, almost respectful. "Brother, is questioning a crime? Is desiring to understand rebellion? If truth is unshaken, then why fear inquiry?" His logic was sharp, and it pierced hearts that were unguarded. Yet his ambition reached further still. He dreamed not merely of questioning heaven, but of remaking it. He believed that by undermining loyalty silently, he could one day seize control without war. Unlike Lucifer, who challenged God with thunder, Namtael wanted to corrode heaven from within. His plan was not open rebellion, it was infiltration. He calculated that if enough angels wavered, heaven itself would collapse under doubt. The Council of Thrones, the high order of angels who burned before God's presence, began to see the tremors. Whispers came to them, choirs uncertain, guards distracted, rivers of harmony disturbed, and they traced these disturbances back to Namtael. His name reached the throne, and once the throne is aware, no shadow remains safe. The heavens shook as judgment approached. Namtael was summoned before the presence of God, not yet condemned, but watched. His followers trembled, though he himself appeared unbroken, his face calm, his words measured. For Namtael truly believed he was right. He did not see himself as a traitor, but as a liberator of minds. That conviction made him dangerous, perhaps more than Lucifer himself. Michael was tasked with watching him, but Michael's fire met Namtael's patience again and again. Where Michael drew his sword, Namtael answered with words. Where Michael declared loyalty, Namtael questioned meaning. It was a clash of fire and shadow, strength and cunning. Neither yielded easily. The time drew near when hidden thoughts would no longer remain hidden. Heaven itself began to divide. In the radiant halls where unity once reigned, two currents now pulled, one toward the throne, the other toward the whisper of Namtael. And though the armies of heaven stood prepared, Namtael's rebellion had already struck a deeper blow, not to the gates, not to the towers, but to the hearts of angels. This was the danger, not open war, but corruption that dressed itself as wisdom. The battle lines were being drawn, though no blade yet clashed. Heaven itself stood on the edge of silence, waiting for the storm. The silence of heaven had grown heavier than thunder. The light that once pulsed in harmony across the eternal skies now trembled, its rhythm fractured. Namtael stood at the edge of the radiant courts, no longer a quiet whisperer in hidden gardens, but a figure whose influence was undeniable. His voice had reached too far, his ideas too deep, and now even the highest thrones turned their gaze upon him. Michael, the burning commander of heaven's armies, had already confronted him with warning and with fire. But Namtael's calm refusal to bow, His unwavering confidence shook the host more than any open act of defiance. For what terrified the angels was not violence, it was conviction, and Namtael's conviction was absolute. The Council of Thrones convened in blazing majesty, their thrones like pillars of fire, their voices like rivers of living flame. They declared that division had entered heaven, that doubt had corrupted its perfect order. They did not speak Namtael's name aloud, for to name him was to acknowledge him. But all knew. His shadow stretched across the heavens. Namtael was summoned before the radiant throne itself. To stand before the unapproachable light was to be stripped bare of all pretense, all masks, all illusions. Many angels trembled even at the thought, but Namtael did not tremble. His wings folded behind him, his face calm, his eyes unwavering. He stood not as a rebel, but as a son convinced he was bringing truth to blinded brethren. When asked, "Why do you stir unrest in heaven? Why do you plant questions in eternal soil?" Namtael answered with clarity, "Because even perfection hides questions, and questions unasked are chains unseen. If heaven is truly eternal, then it must endure the weight of truth." The halls shook at his words. Some angels covered their faces, refusing to hear. Others secretly felt the spark of recognition. Namtael's logic carried a sharpness unlike any sword. He spoke not of overthrow, not of war, but of knowledge, of freedom, of unveiling what had been hidden. And yet, in that freedom, he sowed rebellion deeper than any open defiance. The division now became visible. In the choirs, voices faltered, no longer singing as one. In the armies, glances shifted, some eyes questioning their captains. In the courts, whispers grew, and silence weighed heavier than song. Heaven itself seemed to hold its breath. Michael's patience ended. He appeared before Namtael with the armies of flame at his back. "You will bow," he declared, his sword a river of fire in his hand. "You will repent of your words before the throne of eternity." But Namtael did not bow. His voice was soft, yet it struck like thunder. "I cannot repent for truth. I cannot bow to silence. If heaven is eternal, then let it endure my voice." And then it began, the breaking of heaven, not with fire, not with storm, but with choice. Angels who had lived in unbroken unity for ages beyond measure now chose. Some stepped forward to Michael, their wings blazing with loyalty. Others stepped back, their eyes drawn to Namtael, compelled by his defiance. And many froze, torn between light and shadow, unable to move. The armies of heaven split, not by blade, but by conviction. Rivers of light trembled, towers of radiance shook, the eternal harmony fractured. What had been perfect began to crack. Namtael raised no weapon. He lifted no hand, but his presence divided heaven more than any sword. For rebellion had entered not by force, but by belief. The thrones thundered judgment, their fire shaking the endless halls. But judgment alone could not bind conviction. Namtael's followers began to gather in secret, their voices rising in quiet hymns that did not match the eternal song. Their faces carried awe and fear, believing him to be not a traitor, but a liberator. And so heaven was no longer whole. Namtael, the angel who spoke calmly, who whispered questions sharper than blades, had done what none before him could. He had fractured eternity. He had walked closer to unseating heaven itself than even the brightest rebel. Yet his story was not finished. For once cracks appear in perfection, they spread. And once an angel stands against eternity, the heavens themselves must decide whether to break or to burn away the one who dared to question. As the conflict in heaven reached its peak, Namtael's presence radiated an eerie calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. Angels recoiled at the power emanating from him, their wings trembling as golden light refracted across the celestial halls. Even Michael, the leader of the loyal angels, hesitated as he faced Namtael directly, the tension so thick it seemed to vibrate through the very air. The heavenly throne, distant but ever-present, reflected the stakes of this cosmic confrontation. The balance of all creation rested on the choices made in these moments. Namtael, whose ambition had once threatened the very foundations of heaven, now stood at a crossroads between defiance and submission. His mind, a labyrinth of pride, regret, and lingering divinity. He moved slowly, deliberately, through the vast expanse of marble and gold, the echoes of his steps resonating across the chambers. Behind him, angels whispered, their loyalty uncertain, torn between fear and admiration. They knew that every decision Namtael made would shape not only the immediate battlefield, but the eternal order of creation. Michael's sword, a weapon forged from pure divine energy, glowed intensely, reflecting the fractured light streaming through heavenly windows. Sparks of power flew with each subtle movement, illuminating the archways and ornate pillars that lined the halls. The golden glow on Namtael's wings shimmered like molten metal, and yet his eyes held a depth that spoke of an intelligence far beyond comprehension, a mind capable of calculating centuries in a single moment. Around them, the heavens seemed to pulse with energy as if the universe itself held its breath. Angels on either side of the divide held their positions, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and sorrow. This was no ordinary battle. It was a revelation of the consequences of ambition unchecked, of choices made in the light of eternity. Namtael's followers, though fewer in number, exuded an undeniable magnetism, their presence amplifying his own power. Every flutter of their wings sent ripples through the air, bending light and casting elongated shadows across the polished floors. Michael's forces pressed forward, unwavering, yet even they could sense the almost magnetic authority Namtael commanded without uttering a single word. Then came the moment that would define the course of heaven's history. Namtael stopped at the center of the grand hall, directly in the path of Michael's advance. The light surrounding him intensified, bending and scattering like shards of crystal, illuminating every detail of his form. The faint veins of golden energy coursing along his wings, the intricate embroidery of his midnight robes, and the subtle shimmer of celestial dust that clung to his every movement. Michael raised his sword, the blade humming with divine resonance, yet he did not strike immediately. Instead, he allowed a pause, a heartbeat suspended in time, as if giving Namtael the chance to reconsider the path of rebellion. Namtael's gaze lifted toward the throne, and for a moment, even the heavens seemed to still. In that instant, centuries of cosmic tension coalesced into a single point of clarity. He could continue his defiance, risking total annihilation, or yield, aligning with the divine order and preserving the structure of heaven. His lips parted, not in words of challenge, but in a subtle motion that indicated comprehension, an acknowledgement of the eternal consequences of his choices. Angels shifted, some weeping silently, others trembling with anticipation, all aware that they were witnessing history unfold. As the divine light wrapped around him, Namtael made his choice. He lowered his stance, wings folding partially, and a ripple of relief swept through those who had followed him. Michael slowly lowered his sword, the tension easing but not disappearing entirely. The battle was over, not through violence alone, but through the exercise of will, understanding, and recognition of the eternal order. Heaven itself seemed to exhale, the golden light softening into a serene glow that bathed the halls and reflected off every surface. The angels began to sing, a quiet, harmonious chorus, celebrating the preservation of divine balance. Yet within that song lingered a solemn reminder. The temptation of power and pride could rise again, and vigilance must never falter. Namtael, though humbled, retained a presence that could not be ignored. His followers stood close, eyes wide, inspired by both his intelligence and the restraint he had shown. The echoes of his past ambition remained, but now they were tempered by understanding. Michael approached not as an enemy, but as a guardian ensuring order. The two beings, once poised for ultimate conflict, now shared a moment of silent acknowledgement. The cost of rebellion, the necessity of humility, and the eternal vigilance required to maintain harmony in creation. The throne above gleamed with authority, yet it also reflected mercy, the balance of judgment and grace, a lesson that all angels, whether in loyalty or rebellion, could witness. In the aftermath, the angels dispersed, some quietly returning to their duties, others tending to the wounded or restoring the celestial halls. Namtael remained for a while, observing the vast expanse of heaven he had once sought to dominate. He understood now the weight of eternity, the importance of divine order, and the need for wisdom over unrestrained power. The celestial light seemed to caress his form, acknowledging both his past and the potential for redemption. As he moved, angels watched silently, inspired by his journey and the lessons it imparted. And as this chapter in heaven's history drew to a close, the echoes of the events would ripple through eternity, reminding all beings that even the mightiest could learn humility, and that balance was the cornerstone of creation itself. Before we conclude, consider the implications of Namtael's story on our own lives. In the midst of temptation, pride, or ambition, there is always a path back to understanding, a chance to align with higher purpose. What decisions are we making that could affect our own eternal journey? Reflect, meditate, and allow this story to remind you of the consequences and the mercy that exists within divine order. And if you found this journey through the celestial realms enlightening, take a moment to comment below. Share your thoughts, insights, or questions. Let us discuss and explore together, because the lessons of Namtael extend beyond the heavens and touch each of us, inviting contemplation, wisdom, and perhaps a step closer to understanding the eternal mysteries that surround us.